All right, let's dive right in. Today we're on a pretty big quest. We're looking for a moral bedrock. A solid, unshakable foundation for our sense of right and wrong. Where does that feeling actually come from? Let's go find out. So let's just start with the biggest question of all. Forget what you or I think, forget what any culture says. Is something like torturing an innocent child for fun actually wrong? Like in a real fundamental sense? I think for most of us, there's this deep gut feeling that screams, yes, absolutely.
And that's exactly what we mean by objective here. We're not talking about opinions or what's popular. We're talking about moral truths that are real and binding, whether anyone believes them or not. So if they are a real feature of the universe, what in the world could be their foundation?
Okay, and this brings one of the heavy hitters onto the stage, the moral argument for God's existence. The basic idea is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly profound. It says, look, if these objective moral truths exist, they must be grounded in something. And the best explanation for that ground is some kind of transcendent, personal source.
But hang on, before we get into the weeds, we have to make a distinction that is absolutely crucial. Seriously, this one point causes more confusion than maybe anything else in the entire debate. So if we get this clear right now, the rest of this journey is going to make a lot more sense. We need to separate two totally different questions. So on one side, you have moral ontology. That's the being part. It asks about the fundamental nature of morality itself. What makes it true that murder is wrong? Then on the other side, you have moral epistemology. That's the knowing part. It's all about how we figure out what's right and wrong. The moral argument we're talking about is only about ontology, the foundation, the being of morality. It says nothing about epistemology or how we come to know right from wrong. Think about it like this. You can look up at the night sky and see the stars, right? That's epistemology. But that doesn't mean you know anything about the nuclear fusion that makes them shine. That's ontology. In the same way, an atheist can absolutely know what's right and wrong. The argument just claims that without a transcendent source, you can't explain the ultimate origin of that right and wrong.
Okay, so we've got that key distinction down, but our quest immediately runs into its first massive roadblock. And this isn't some new problem. It's an ancient philosophical puzzle first cooked up by Plato, and it's been tripping people up for thousands of years.
This is the famous Euthyphro dilemma, and it presents you with two options, both of which seem, well, pretty terrible. The first horn says something is good just because God says so. But then morality seems totally random, right? God could command cruelty and suddenly it would be good. The second horn says God commands things because they're already good. But then goodness is a standard that's separate from and even above God, and that doesn't seem right either. So what gives? For centuries, that dilemma felt like a checkmate. It just seemed like a fatal trap. But many modern philosophers and theologians think they've found an escape route, a third way that cleverly navigates right between those two deadly horns. And here's the solution. Goodness isn't some external rule book God has to follow, and it's not something he just invents as he goes along. Instead, God's very own character, his perfect love, his perfect justice, his perfect kindness, is the ultimate standard for what good even means. He doesn't just decide what's good. He is good. And just like that, this one move seems to solve both problems. First, it avoids the independence problem because goodness isn't some law floating out there above God. It's grounded in his very being. And second, it totally dodges the arbitrariness problem. God's commands aren't random. They flow directly from his unchanging, loving nature. He can't command cruelty for its own sake, any more than a square can have 5 sides. So, our quest survived that ancient trial, but a very modern ambush is waiting for us just around the corner. This time, the challenge isn't from ancient philosophy. It's from modern biology. And it asks a really uncomfortable question. Can we even trust our moral beliefs in the first place? These are what people call evolutionary debunking arguments, or EDAs. The core idea here is that the process of natural selection is what really shaped our moral intuitions. The reason we think things like helping others is good or cheating is bad isn't because those things are objectively true, but because holding those beliefs helped our ancestors survive long enough to pass on their genes. The philosopher Sharon Street puts this into another sharp dilemma. She says, look, either there's no connection at all between the evolutionary process and objective moral truths, in which case it would be an insane coincidence if our beliefs just happen to line up with the truth, or there is a connection.
But evolution only cares about survival, not about abstract things like goodness. Either way you go, our confidence in our moral compass gets completely torpedoed.
And this is the really devastating conclusion. If our sense of morality is just a clever trick our genes played on us to help us survive, then it loses all its real authority. That powerful feeling that some things are objectively wrong just becomes a useful illusion, a fiction that evolution hardwired into our brains.
Wow. I mean, that feels like a knockout punch, doesn't it? But there's a final gambit in this whole debate, a philosophical counterattack that suggests the very weapon used to debunk morality might just turn on itself.
It's called the companions in guilt argument. And the basic idea is that the same logic you use to undermine our belief in objective morality could, if you apply it consistently, also unravel our belief in objective reason and science itself.
Just look at the parallel here. You've got the moral domain with facts like it's wrong to lie. If you debunk that with evolution, you get moral nihilism. Okay, but now think about the domain of reason, epistemology. We accept facts like you shouldn't believe in contradictions. But if our rational minds were also just shaped for survival, not for trekking truth, then you get global skepticism, the complete collapse of all rational belief.
And here's the beautiful trap. To make the evolutionary argument against morality in the first place, you have to use reason. You have to trust logic and scientific evidence. But if the whole point of your argument is that evolution made all of our mental tools unreliable, only good for survival, then that has to include the very tools of reason you're using to make your case. You're standing on the very branch you're trying to saw off.
So, our quest for a moral bedrock, it lands us right here with this final massive question. The stakes are way higher than we thought. In trying to explain away objective good and evil, do we risk explaining away our very ability to think, to reason, and to know anything for sure? Now that is something to chew on. Thanks for joining me.